Hey everyone. I hope everyone's here and is doing well today. Welcome and great to have you all here today with us. My name is Lisa Levy. I'm a content specialist at Satori. A little bit about myself. I live in Modin in Israel. I have three kids who are relatively young and keep me on my toes. I have a background in academics, but I am enjoying this shift to or transition to the tech sort of startup scene, and it's been really fun and interesting. Um, I love hockey, probably one of my favorite things, and I'm thrilled that the season is finally starting again. And so I'm here today to talk with you all about the state of data security operations survey that we did and the report that we put out. So the real idea here is that we conducted this survey to get a really good understanding of the data security arena. And basically, when we're thinking about this, we're trying to think about the issues or the main problems that data security leaders are facing. This is really important because we know that in order to tackle a problem, we kind of have to know what that problem is, first of all. So the goal here was to really identify those areas that data security leaders are sort of tackling or trying to solve in order to find the optimal solution for this. Okay, so why did we conduct this survey? Well, we really wanted to understand the hardships that data leaders face. We wanted to know, those areas that they're struggling with. We want to know what problems going on. We know that, data is sort of everywhere now. Organizations have tons of data. Everybody's collecting data. We're increasingly reliant on data. And this really fuels organizations' ability to analyze and optimize decision making. So we know that the goal of most organizations is to profit maximize. And in order to profit maximize, we need to have as much information as possible. And in order to do that, we need to collect data because data kind of tells us what's going on. And so that's really what we were doing with this survey, what we were really trying to find out. And so we know that some of this data includes sensitive information. And so this sensitive information is something that we need to take care of. So the more data that's collected, the greater the potential to maximize return. We can create a lot of added value by having data. We can share this information across all sorts of divisions within the company. It can really help us figure out what's going on and sort of make the best decisions that we can. And so what we need to do here then is kind of collect this data, which we do, and we know that a lot of it includes sensitive data. And so what do we do with that? So as the amount of data that we've collected increases, so do some of these drawbacks, right? We know that we have this increase in data availability, in storage, right? Analysis. We've had these increase in the number of drawbacks. There's now a much greater potential of data breaches. The prevalence and cost of data breaches have continued to rise well into 2022. It's expected to rise into the future. We know that a breach costs about somewhere in the range of 4.3 to 9.44 million per breach. And in addition to just the monetary costs, we also know that there's these other additional costs or damage to customers' trust and brand. And these are non-trivial amounts for most companies. So the size and the quantity of these data breaches really is something that can have a huge impact on the bottom line of most businesses. Further, we know that as data has become more available, so has the necessity to impose greater requirements protecting this data. We've seen the development of GDPR and CCPA and other forms of regulations. These are there to govern the use and storage of sensitive data. And meeting these requirements, while important, is also not costless, right? It takes people's time, it takes people's energy, it costs resources to kind of develop things in order to meet these requirements. And as data teams are increasingly required to deal with security of data, either through identifying or classifying or even granting access to data, this requires people's time, people's energy and resources. And while this is valuable, right, it does prevent individuals from working on other value generating projects. Therefore, in total, we kind of took or conducted the survey to get an idea about the concerns of data leaders and scientists and how we could secure sensitive data, reducing the likelihood or reducing these costs of data while still enabling organizations to freely share their data to maximize value. Okay, so we conducted the survey in March and April, sorry, of 2022. We distributed the survey to about 300 data security leaders from a very wide range of organizations in order to get a good understanding about what the main concerns are, right? And these included a large number of firms, different types of firms, different sizes of firms, and we'll see that it's going to be a fairly broad range of participants. We saw that the participants were relatively evenly divided between data platform engineers and data analysts. And by and large, the majority of respondents were from the technology sector, about 60%, with fintech and healthcare and health tech, about 10% each. So the other industries were relatively similar. Now, approximately half of all of the participants were from startups and the other half were from Fortune 500 companies. What's really nice about this is that it gave us a really good or broad breadth of respondents from both engineers and analysts and from startups and Fortune 500 companies. So we get a really broad and diverse range of responses over which we can kind of figure out what the main security issues are. So as we see, right, the prevalence and ease of collecting data means that most organizations now have a large amount of sensitive data. And we saw that an overwhelming majority of the organizations store some form of sensitive data. So at least, so in this case, we saw about 75% of the organization or the respondents claim that they have some form of sensitive data. And when we're talking about sensitive data, we mean like email addresses, phone numbers. In the case of financial firms, these can be data such as credit scores or bank credit card information and things like that. And so while we see that there's a large amount of data, we know that majority of these firms have at least some form of sensitive data. And as we move towards a more globally integrated sort of economy and digital world, the prevalence of sensitive information is likely to rise. So what we really want to know is, or one of the things that we were interested in is who's responsible for securing this data, right? We found that it was pretty much shared relatively evenly across security teams and data platforms and the engineering organization, along with the privacy and compliance group. And then a little bit of the data science teams were the significant holders. So it was somewhat of a mixed bag between who was actually required or who has ownership of securing the data. So we know that primarily it's the responsibility of security teams to ensure that sensitive data is sort of held within the organization carefully. But this is really going to vary depending on the size and type of organization. Smaller organizations are less likely to have dedicated security teams and may instead rely on data engineers who are responsible for, more diverse aspects of the organization, whereas much larger Fortune 500 companies are likely to have a whole team that's devoted solely to security. So it's really going to depend on the makeup of the company as to kind of how security gets handled or who handles the security. But we can see that altogether, the responsibility of data security is a collaborative effort across multiple teams, which lends the question of, do we need or should we have a new approach that sort of allows this collaborative effort to continue with these processes and corresponding tools. Okay. So what were some of the main concerns of the individuals that we talked to? We know that the majority of the respondents store some form of sensitive data. So what are they primarily concerned about? And this is really kind of at the heart of what we wanted to know. And so we really wanted to explore this issue and the concerns that we had here. And we found that a significantly large number, like 85%, were most concerned about data breaches or exposure of customers' sensitive data. right? This isn't particularly surprising. We kind of had this idea going in. We know that the number and cost of data breaches continues to rise with increasingly sophisticated attacks. And further, we know that the exposure of customers' information can be both costly and enduring in terms of impacts on brand and customers' perception and trust of the organization. So in addition to just the monetary costs, there's these other costs that can just continue to kind of linger for a while. Can all kind of remember like the major data breaches that have occurred. In addition to data breaches, we see about 1 in 3 of the participants considered sensitive data to be critical to meeting data sort of security, privacy, or compliance standards from their customers, whereas 25% were kind of concerned about addressing security data for compliance in terms of privacy regulations. So securing access to sensitive data, whatever the reason, whether it's to prevent a data breach or to make sure that we're in compliance, is a common and prevalent question, right, in the minds of most of our respondents. So even if some of them don't deal with it on a day-to-day basis, it's really just in the back of everybody's mind that we really need to take care of our sensitive data very carefully to make sure that it's always secure. So having determined the importance and the necessity of securing sensitive data, how are organizations actually performing sort of this task, right? So given this sort of very wide scope and range of having to discover sensitive data, we found that basically about only, and this was somewhat surprising, only about 20% of respondents have automated tools that scan their data periodically, while about half of all the companies don't have automated tools or processes for identifying sensitive customer data across their data stores. So we're seeing that the majority of organizations either do this manually or rely on or do it less periodically than maybe it ought to be done. So given that only like a third of the respondents have continuous or real-time scanning, right, this becomes a very, very, very labor-intensive and resource-intensive process, right, to continue this and continue to do this. So this is a highly fragmented process, which relies on multiple tools, custom codes. It's very labor intensive. It requires a tremendous amount of time, a tremendous amount of energy to do this. And so not only is this process somewhat less frequent than should be, it also takes teams away from other things that they could be doing with their time. So if we were to use something that was a little bit more automated, right, we might see data teams freeing up their time. This can also lead to issues with bottlenecking in access control and outdated audit logs. Some of the major problems with this are, maybe we have data that's less secure, but it also can reduce the effectiveness of the actual data that we have because it may be somewhat outdated, or we may not actually know exactly where it is or what we should be doing with it. So it's really very important to maybe consider things like automating this type of process. So we know that the majority of about 20% of the survey respondents are spending about 20 to 30% of their time on data security, right? So this includes writing and maintaining custom code, processing manual requests for data access, creating custom reports, right? And about 12% are spending over 30% of their time to address data security requirements. And so we're finding that these teams are spending a tremendous amount of time on this, right? More than 50% of the people that we talk to would really like to work less on security and compliance requirements and instead focus on their core projects or those things that they actually, really want to work on. And we see that more than 50% find that it really slows down their other data projects. So not only is this a drain on people's time and energy, it also reduces the effectiveness of other data projects that are also ongoing at the same time. So there's a real need to provide automated processes that ensure that data is secure and allows data engineers and analysts to work on those projects, for which they're trained. So we want to really think about automating and streamlining data security, privacy and compliance processes, free up people's professionals' time, and to sort of have an integrated DataSecOps or data approach in order to get the most out of the data and to have it maximize value for the organization. Now, some issues here are that this is sort of unlikely to change in the near future. We can see that about 3/4 of all of the respondents are actually increasing access to data. So this is actually kind of a good thing in that we're now providing, more access to all of this data and the wealth and the richness that we have, but we're still relying on these manual processes. And so, we already have these overwhelmed data teams, and they're likely to continue to have, additional access requests. They're going to spend additional time searching for and classifying data. We're going to see that access control is going to be bottleneck for both analysts and engineers, where analysts want access to the data, engineers need to grant access or revoke access when necessary. And it's going to be really important to see that we're gaining important access to data. We know that this further reduces the effectiveness of the organization. So while it's great that the organization is striving towards providing greater access to the data and providing it, more freely to their different departments and making the most out of what we have, unless we have a really streamlined and automated process, this can really reduce the effectiveness of the data and the ROI. And so, that's really what we learned coming out of this survey. We learned that there's a real problem, okay? Even though we see data leaders being sort of frustrated by having to spend a considerable amount of time on access control and security tasks, like granting and revoking access, if there are only a few companies who are automating the processes, right, this means that we're going to have to think about ways that we can do this in a more efficient manner. So we know that that the future is kind of bright in terms of data democratization, right? We have this sort of increase in terms of data accessibility, but companies need to have plans and projects to expand this data access within the company, but it needs to be done in a way that is a little bit more automated and is less strain on data engineering groups. So this is one of the strengths of being able to extract value from the data so that we can sort of optimize our decisions across all parts. Now, the majority of companies are still relying on manual, sort of an ad hoc legacy tools and disparate processes to authorize access to users, which is frustrating to both data engineers and those who are responsible for the time-intensive processes, and also those that want to have access to the data, right? It really slows down the whole process. We would really like to have access to the data right now. Therefore, having some kind of self-service or just-in-time access is going to be really a necessity as these firms sort of scale up their production, scale up the amount of data that they are collecting. So kind of where do we go from here? We know that organizations are increasingly reliant on data to optimize decisions and decision making. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of value in data. However, we need to ensure that we can provide improved access to this data that's both easily implemented and integrated. So we see the rise in importance of data necessitates that we have compliance requirements that are sort of up to date and are likely to grow, right, in both security, sort of in terms of complexity and depth. Therefore, organizations are going to have to meet increasingly complex requirements in order to make sure that they're in compliant with different types of resources. So we need to think about how we can do this. So one of the things that we saw, or one of the ways that we can do this, obviously, is with Satori, right? The survey really highlighted data leaders' issues or frustrations with the issues of granting access to control, security, and productivity. And so this really makes our mission and the services that we provide at Satori all the more critical. Satori is a cloud-based service, right, that sits between users and your data stores. It's really easy to integrate Satori across all data stores, even when the data changes. So there's no need to update masking rules as data changes. There's no, it's really reduces resources and the necessity of time that's there. We provide just-in-time access control, so this will eliminate all of those bottlenecks. We can grant access and added security by removing access when necessary. And this can all be autonomized through the data portal that provides self-service request access. We also have access analytics and auditing logs, which provide information about who has access and monitors access patterns. So Satori enables viewing and analyzing and reporting across audit logs at scale in order to meet both compliance requirements without having, all of this set up that can be quite difficult. And so what we can see is that a lot of these frustrations or issues that we identified in the survey from having, more data at scale, having these bottlenecks in terms of granting access control, we can really work towards eliminating these and allowing firms or organizations to have more secure data through access controls, ensuring that we meet compliance, reduce the risk of breaches, protect brands, maximize value for the organization, return on investment, and things like that. Is the service that Satori provides. So if you would like to learn more about this, you can visit our site at satori.com and book a meeting with one of our experts if you want one-on-one demo on how it works. This is an overview of what we found from our survey of data leaders. We have an upcoming webinar on November 3rd. We're going to have managing confidential data with CockroachDB between Cockroach Labs and Satori. I hope that you'll join us for that. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have at this point. Whoops. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so here's the question. What was one of the most surprising findings that we didn't think we'd find? I think that in in looking at this, and I know I mentioned it during the presentation, it was surprising, even though we knew that most access controls aren't manual, we didn't realize the actual percentage of access controls that aren't automated, right? 20% is a fairly small number of fully automated access controls. And so I think that it was a little surprising in terms of the full extent of how manual these processes are and how much and how somewhat inefficient in terms of time and resources spent this is the case. Did we see any differences across geography? No, we didn't test for that. So it was probably something that we could do in the future to take a look at that. One last question we have is, can't you just eliminate the risks to security data by not storing sensitive data? Sure, you could do that, but data is valuable, right? This isn't typically an option. We want to be able to collect sensitive data. It's necessary to have this. It creates value, it generates value, and so we really want to have differential privacy, and we want to have different users be able to access sensitive data. It's really important. And so we really work towards providing that securely in order to generate as much value for businesses as possible. So those are all the questions that I see. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to visit us at satori.com and book a demo if you would like to have one-on-one access. If you have any additional questions, of course, please feel free to email us and let us know. I hope that you've enjoyed this. And again, we will have another upcoming webinar on MongoDB in November 3rd here with, sorry, not Mongo, with CockroachDB on November 3rd, Ben and some other engineers and project managers from Cockroach Labs. And we hope to see you then. I hope that you've all enjoyed, and we will talk to you later.